and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mobardi. Today is Monday, July 22nd, and we are going to be diving into the latest news that Jordan Love is planning on holding out from training camp as he looks to work on a long-term deal with the Packers. So we are going to dive into that entire conversation as to how much should the Packers be looking to pay Jordan Love, and additionally whether it is the right decision for him to hold out. Then we are going to be talking about the Cincinnati Bengals as we continue to preview the upcoming season for all 32 teams. Next up, we have the Bengals, so we will be breaking down their schedule, their offseason roster moves, and ultimately giving my predictions on how they will turn out this upcoming year. Then in the latter half of the show, we are going to be talking about Team USA's scare against South Sudan over the weekend to come back and remain undefeated. And additionally, we will be talking about the Boston Celtics, who continue to just spend an unprecedented amount of money this offseason, bringing back everybody back and just talking about the greater implications of the financial responsibility of this Celtics team that's also going through an ownership change and what that is all going to look like in the years to come. And then finally, we are going to be wrapping up the show with the Boston Red Sox, who were swept by the LA Dodgers over the weekend. We'll be breaking down that series and overall what it means. But before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on all the latest happenings in sports. And if you would consider becoming a bigger part of the show, you can leave a tip or donation that is streaming across with using the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. If you leave a comment, it'll pop up on screen for everyone to see. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. The news just came out that Jordan Love, the Green Bay Packers quarterback, is planning on holding out of training camp in order to try and work on a long-term deal between him and the Packers. Love was really, for the first time, despite being drafted years ago in 2020, he got his first time to shine in his third season with the Packers, and after a little bit of a bumpy start, he was able to put it all together and produce a very nice season. 4,100 yards, 32 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, and he led a very young Packers team to a surprise playoff appearance and then even a win over the Dallas Cowboys. And I think there is a, further debate if you want to start to go hypotheticals. Jordan Love was good for a lot of that divisional round game against the 49ers as well. Ultimately, the offense slowed up. His inexperience kicked in a little bit. He had the game-sealing interception that odds were stacked against him at that point anyways. A lot of people point to that play as sort of, making almost more of it than it really is, but Love has a lot of promise, and I'm not the only one saying that, of course. That is kind of the common consensus around the NFL headed into next year. If you tune into any ESPN segments on, MVP conversations or who you would take to build your franchise around, there is a lot of love for Jordan Love, and it's for good reason. And because of that, Jordan is trying to go out and secure a long-term deal, because as much as it's nice to get the respect, it's all about the money at the end of the day when you're playing in this. Jordan Love took a very team-friendly contract extension last offseason, and now his chance, after everything that he feels like he went out and put out on the field, that the Packers should pay him big-time money. Now, I don't know the specifics in terms of what the negotiations have looked like up to this point. There have been conflicting reports on where things stand in terms of the contract negotiation. CBS Sports just yesterday posted an article about how the sides are not close. Packers general manager spoke out about how they are actually closer than people think. So, not exactly sure there. You have to imagine that the price is going to be around that $50 million a year mark. That's what Jared Goff just got. Trevor Lawrence a little higher than that, but Love is probably somewhere in the middle of those two marks if you want to look into the Trevor Lawrence and the Jared Goff contract specifically, because the reality is Trevor Lawrence was, known to be the best prospect coming into the NFL since Andrew Luck. At the time he was drafted in 2021, he was the consensus number 1 overall pick, and he has shown flashes of greatness. Now, you can argue amongst yourselves in the comment section right now about who is the better quarterback, Trevor Lawrence or Jordan Love. I personally would go probably with Trevor Lawrence at this point, but I can also very much hear out a conversation for Jordan Love on the other side as well. But I feel like a little bit when you're talking about the overall body of work here, Jordan Love was very successful in his first full year of playing, but that was at the age of 25 with 2 years in the league, granted backing up Aaron Rodgers, but he had a couple years of NFL experience to at least some degree already under his belt, and he had all the advantages of being in the NFL and learning, but the rest of the NFL hasn't yet had time to adjust to him, Jordan Love, in terms of making the adjustments, learning his tendencies and his weaknesses as a part of that. So we haven't really seen that adaptation part of Jordan Love's game just yet. Now, again, I'm very positive based off of what we saw last season, but there isn't, this massive body of work like even Trevor Lawrence, where it's, to be fair, he has won just as many playoff games as Jordan Love has in, a similar time frame. Trevor Lawrence has more starts than Jordan Love does at this point, but I think that Love, as much as you can be very positive on him, and I am choosing to be, I don't think it would be the most shocking thing in the world in terms of if he did have some serious regression this upcoming year, as other defenses actually have a full offseason to game plan against him. It's not going to be as easy for him next season. And that being said, what I'm so encouraged with about Jordan Love is the fact that he was able to, sort of in a similar sense to CJ Stroud last year, have a lot of success without one of those top tier wide receiver 1 options, where you look at the weapons that were around Love last season, it's a lot of draft picks from the past couple of years, and none of them even being top 10 picks, but you get your second rounders and Christian Watson and Jaden Reed. Luke Musgrave, I want to say, was a second round pick, maybe a third round pick, but you just go across the receiving leaders for the Packers last season, and you are having a lot of players that haven't necessarily fully established themselves in the league, but Jordan Love did just such a good job of spreading the ball around and, making the most of the opportunities. And, there wasn't even a single wide receiver above 800 yards on the year, but Jordan Love was able to still throw 4,100 in his first season of being a starter. So I have a lot of confidence in Jordan Love long term. The reality is, when you're talking about paying quarterbacks, you're kind of just paying the rate that is available. It's either you're matching what the market currently is, or you are playing it out and you're not giving out the contract. That's what we're seeing currently going on with Tua Tagovailoa. He's asking for what the market value for starting quarterbacks is going for right now. The Dolphins aren't willing to give him that $50 million a year mark, and so instead the two parties are just sort of playing this out and seeing how it goes. Now, if I'm the Packers, again, would I feel better about having a little bit more security, seeing how he performs early on in this year? Yes, but at the same time, you kind of just have to do the deal, I feel like. And I think it just sets a precedent for this young locker room. Again, while there is a lot of turnover that's taken place over the past couple of years, as long as LaFleur is on the same page with Jordan Love and he has confidence in him, I feel like it's just a deal that they are going to have to bite the bullet on to some degree. And I say bite the bullet as if it is some sort of a negative. There's a chance that, Jordan Love does turn into everything we've been hyping him up to be this offseason, and he has a ton of success. But I also do understand a little bit of hesitations from the perspective of the Packers. We see a lot of these contracts get handed out after career years, and they don't age all so well. You can look at Daniel Jones just a couple off seasons ago, where it was somebody who, and by no means are any of the circumstances really the same with Daniel Jones and Jordan Love. Outside of the fact that I believe they were in the same, they weren't even in the same draft class. Daniel Jones was 2019. So, age-wise a little bit, but, Daniel Jones, he had his 1 year in 2022, and that's what got him paid. And the difference there, I think, is that we had seen Daniel Jones for a few years and we already weren't really sold on him, that when he had this one good year and the Giants had a good amount of success winning a playoff game, that they were sort of pigeonholed into taking that, big money swing. With Jordan Love, almost the unknown is what scares you more than anything else. But, they have had the ability to scout him within their own organization for a couple of years, and I feel like they're probably going to end up on a deal with relatively little trouble getting in the way. Packers are at a point where, yes, they are still extremely young, and they overachieved last year. Their expectations shouldn't be, winning a Super Bowl this year, but you still kind of feel like, with how open that NFC is, that they have a very good chance. Again, just to sort of come full circle here, when you dive into the hypothetical of, what happens, the Carlson ends up missing the kick for the Packers that was late in that game, which was a disaster for them. If the Packers hold on to beat the 49ers in that game, that I think in general they outplayed San Francisco. They have the division rivals in their own, in the Lions, who are also, they had higher expectations coming into the year, but also still, largely unproven. The Lions, I believe, did they win 9 games in 2022? It was something along those lines. So, I think that ultimately the Packers can envision a world where they could have easily made the Super Bowl last year, which is crazy to think, because they also very easily could have been a bottom of the barrel team. But they're going to continue to invest, I think, in the infrastructure that got them as far as they did last season. And I don't foresee any massive issues in terms of Jordan Love and the Packers. But also, that being said, for Love, I'm probably doing whatever I can to get this contract this year, understanding what the going rate for quarterbacks are right now. Took a team-friendly deal last offseason. It's time for you to go and get paid, and I do think that that's what's going to happen by the time that the season starts. But let me know whether or not you have any other concerns with Jordan Love or with the contract negotiation process. But we're going to be taking our first break of the show now. When we come back on the other side, we're going to be diving into the Cincinnati Bengals season preview as we continue to do so for all 32 teams. So we will be back talking about whether or not there are concerns with Joe Burrow's health headed into another season, if some of the stars that requested trades from them this offseason are going to end up getting moved, and ultimately breaking down their schedule and predicting their record. So we are going to dive into all of that. Stick with us. We will be right back.
feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as today we are going to be continuing to preview the upcoming NFL season for all 32 teams, and today we are covering the Cincinnati Bengals. And the Bengals last year had a pretty weird season where coming into the year, we saw Joe Burrow suffer a calf strain that was really impacting him early on. Now, he was able to play the games early in the season, but it was very clear, anytime they cut to him on the sideline, he was using that massage gun. And, having it be on, I believe it was his right leg, the leg that you're trying to power off of in terms of being a right-handed quarterback coming from behind, it was pretty devastating for him early on. Mobility was a big issue, and like I mentioned, just the overall throwing power, I do believe, was impacted by the fact that he wasn't able to plant off of his back foot quite as much. But, things only ended up getting worse, where he ended up having that wrist injury that he suffered in week 11 against the Baltimore Ravens that took him out for the rest of the year. And ultimately, it was just not the season you were hoping for out of Burrow, where it feels like, if you're a Bengals fan at this point, any year where Joe Burrow is fully healthy, you have to have confidence that you are going to be able to be a contender. And last year, they just never really were able to hit their stride because Joe Burrow was never able to be fully healthy. And yet, overall, they still ended up winning 9 games. And I don't think that the Bengals fans should feel like they are all that far off and that they improved in the offseason. But we're going to be going through some of their 2023 numbers, and there really weren't a ton of positive notes. And obviously, when you're talking about the offensive statistics, you do have to understand that Burrow missed those 7 games, and that he was, and that ultimately for Burrow, he because of the fact that he was gone, the passing statistics were significantly down. But even that being said, that definitely wasn't all of it, and it's going to be difficult for the Bengals to try and rebuild all of that up in the first place. Finding that momentum again, it doesn't help that their offensive coordinator in Brian Callahan left them this offseason. He received the head coaching job offer for the Tennessee Titans, so they end up replacing Callahan with Dan Pitcher, who has been the quarterback's coach for the past few seasons. So ultimately a pretty good job replacing him, I would say. And when you look at last year's numbers, again, not a ton of positives there. Only mark that they were top 10 in was red zone, but other than that, they were sort of below average in the majority of categories. That I think a lot of that will correct itself once Joe Burrow is back and healthy. The thing that stands out to me the most, though, looking at the numbers, is the fact that they were 31st in rush yards per game last season. And on top of that, they are losing their number 1 running back in Joe Mixon. So they ran for just 89.8 rush yards per game last year. Joe Mixon, they end up trading him signing Zach Moss as his replacement as the running back one. It is, I would say, a downgrade, but I don't know quite how significant. Ultimately, when you look at Mixon's tenure over the course of the number of years that he was with Cincinnati, he played there for, I believe it was 7 seasons, and he had some good years, but ultimately he did feel like he was overall kind of net average. Now, he had some very big touchdown performances throughout his career and he was like, mostly when he was healthy, he was a consistent 1,000 yards rusher in most seasons, but I don't know how much he really moved the needle, and now they're probably going to lean more into the Joe Burrow attack because they had Mixon, dating back a number of years before Burrow came into town and took over the scene, but Joe Mixon is definitely a loss for them. Now, ultimately shaping out their new depth chart at running back as things currently stand, it's Zach Moss, and then it's Chase Brown, Travion Williams, and Chris Evans. A number of names that have showed some promise. Chase Brown was a rookie for them last season, but, outside of that, Evans and Williams have been with the Bengals for a good few years, and they're going to be in backup roles, so maybe some promise. We'll see. I still don't feel like the rush attack is going to be significantly better. I mean, 31st in the league is pretty hard to, be worse than, looking at the numbers there and the fact that Joe Burrow missed as many games as he did, and the passing offense just wasn't quite the threat. Especially once Jake Browning came in, that teams were able to load up against the run a little bit more. But I don't think that they upgraded necessarily. Again, Joe Burrow's presence makes things easier for the Bengals in terms of the run game, but the offensive line is mostly the same. And, at the running back position, it's still pretty mediocre overall, which isn't going to be make or break for them. It is the pass game that their offense is going to be very predicated on. I want to briefly touch here on T. Higgins, who obviously it's been a very noisy offseason for him, considering the fact that he was franchise tagged and the two parties weren't able to come to a deal. Higgins was frustrated with that, requested a trade at one point, but I think that ultimately they're going to come to terms that Higgins realistically just did not have the trade value that would have been worth it for the Bengals coming off of the worst statistical season of T. Higgins' career. And for him, he just doesn't really have all that much leverage. He's going to go play with a quarterback in Joe Burrow that is top 3 in the NFL, in my opinion. Definitely top 5 and when healthy. And ultimately, he should see his numbers come back, and this can probably be a symbiotic relationship, at least for this year, where Higgins can build up his value again and ultimately get paid next offseason. So I think he's going to be there. Putting him alongside Jamar Chase, they bring in a little bit of a sneaky, maybe not all that impactful of a signing, but one that stood out to me as well was adding Mike Gesicki, who is a pretty good tight end option. We've seen Joe Burrow really enjoy having reliable options from a tight end perspective. Now, Gesicki probably becomes the number one. A couple other, decent options for them last year. You saw Drew Sample and Tanner Hudson actually have all right years for them. We'll see how Gesicki plays into this, but I did like that addition as well. Also ended up drafting Jermaine Burton, who could be a big-time playmaker as well. But looking at the defense now, again, a lot of pretty bad numbers overall, and this honestly surprised me more than anything else because I do have optimism for their defense, but it was very clear, and I think that one of the, biggest issues for them was the fact that their secondary was just so young last year with the losses that they had suffered the past couple years of Jesse Bates going to Atlanta and having Von Bell leave them as well for Carolina. But you look at the names that they have on that defense last year, and I was surprised at just how unsuccessful they were. Trey Hendrickson has had 17 and a half, I believe it was last season, sacks. He has had 13 and a half or more in in 3 of the past 4 seasons. He's another player who did request a trade about a month ago or so, but I don't think that's happening either. The Bengals are looking to cash out on a chance at a Super Bowl, and they're not going to make any moves right now unless they are forced to that are going to, actively at this point in the offseason, they're not going to make moves to make themselves worse. They are going to try and capitalize on everything that they have this year. But Sam Hubbard has been a pretty nice development across from him. They add Sheldon Rankins this offseason from a D tackle. And then I think that they have some depth, some names that I'm interested in. The one I'm most so interested in is Myles Murphy. They took him in the first round of the 2023 draft out of Clemson. He was really good there when he was with Clemson. So I feel like they're going to try and maybe get him some extra looks and see if he can be a replacement for Trey Hendrickson if Hendrickson continues to be unhappy there in Cincinnati. He does still have 2 seasons left on his contract, but we'll see there. Bengals overall pretty strong defensive front, additionally with some of their linebacking core of Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt. But like I mentioned, that secondary is the biggest concern with them. And this offseason, they add Von Bell back in free agency after his stint with Carolina, and Geno Stone, who ended up having a career season this past year with Baltimore, still a very young player that could end up having some big-time upside, but Stone was a big part of that Baltimore defense that was among the best in the league last season. So I love adding this veteran presence of Von Bell. Even if Geno Stone, age-wise, isn't necessarily a veteran, had a few seasons under his belt, was a contributor last year for a team that went to the AFC Championship. And they have a lot of young players in that secondary that I think have high upside as well. I'm a big fan of Cam Taylor-Britt. And then at cornerback, they have a couple other young guys, Jordan Battle, DJ Turner, Dax Hill, all players with potential that they've drafted in the first 2 days of the NFL draft within the past 3 drafts. So a lot of upside players, but again, a good amount of inexperience. And I do like them also having Mike Hilton there. So I think that Hilton and Bell can be a combination of options in that secondary that can, help organize the group a little bit better. But looking at their schedule, I think that ultimately, pretty good, all things considered. I talked about this with the Ravens last week, that when you were talking about having a team in a division that is as strong as the AFC North is, that it's not often you're going to come across an easy schedule, but Sharp Football Analysis has this as the 6th easiest schedule in the NFL this upcoming season. Their line is at 10.5 wins. Biggest games probably, especially if you're looking at the out of division matchups, it is week 2 against the Kansas City Chiefs on the road in that one. It's week 8 on the road against the Philadelphia Eagles, and it is week 14 on the road against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, outside of that, out of division opponents aren't all too bad. You have the Patriots, the Commanders, the Panthers, the Giants, all of these different teams that just aren't all that threatening to a team like the Bengals. So I think that they're going to have a big time bounce back season, specifically so looking at the damage they could potentially do in the postseason. But I have my record prediction for them at 11-6. Their line is 10.5, so I have them slightly over here. And it feels like, considering everything that went wrong with Joe Burrow last year, they still were able to win 9 games, that there is a very real possibility that the Bengals could win more than this as well and end up trying to secure a 1 seed. Looking at the teams that we have already done our predictions for up to this point, I think that they are right in that conversation. I have the Bills and the Ravens also with 11 wins. So they're going to be, in that sort of competitive nature at that point. You look at the AFC last year, 4 teams with 11 wins. 12 is what got it done, I believe. Let me double check on that note, but I believe it was 12 wins for the Ravens that was able to get it done in the AFC last year to lock down that 1 seed. So, it was 13 actually that they won. Somebody's going to have to sort of pull ahead. I feel like there are a lot of very talented teams at the top of the AFC, and the Bengals are going to have a very good chance to perform at that level. But let me know what you agree with, disagree with. I feel like 11 wins is fair. And again, if there is any team that I think could sort of skyrocket from preseason expectations, the Bengals, if they are able to, round out that defense a little bit better. I still have some concerns there, but I do think that there's a lot of potential there with that defense. And then just seeing what Joe Burrow looks like next year as well, because, I don't want it to be the case that and I think that the injury thing with Burrow can be a little bit overblown at times, but it'll just be nice to see, at some point soon if Joe Burrow is able to string together a number of healthy seasons. But again, let me know what your thoughts are. Have the Bengals at 11-6. We're going to be taking our our next break of the show, and we are going to be diving into Team USA's close call over the weekend against South Sudan, where they had to pull off a comeback in order to win that game, and what could have been the biggest upset in Team USA basketball history. So we are going to break all of that down, but first we're going to be taking a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube, absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be just diving in quickly here on Team USA's win over South Sudan that took place over the weekend. This was another one of the exhibition games as we continue to run through here. But Team USA got a little bit of a scare here, and I feel like people are sort of waiting on this team a little bit to, I wouldn't even say, fully take off, because they're undefeated at this point. They've had a couple, significant wins in terms of ultimately they were able to pull away from Serbia and rout them. Team Canada as well. Granted, in that game, I think that Canada punted a little bit early in the fourth quarter, considering the fact that it was just an exhibition game. There wasn't quite as much of a need to go all out for it. But the U.S. has seen their share of struggles over the course of the first few games, and that was the case yet again here against South Sudan, where they were down by as much as 16 points early in this game. Now, again, they are able to, turn it around, and we see that with this Team USA roster and this collection of basketball players, that once they do fully click, there is very little stopping them. But even that being said, South Sudan outscored the U.S., I believe, in that fourth quarter when things were tight. So there's definitely a case to be made that this team is, not preparing quite in the right way mentally. And it's something that is just, I feel like, really in basketball, more so than any other sport, we tend to have these conversations about the idea of overlooking your opponents. And, Steve Kerr sort of chalked it up to that as well, said that it was on him, sort of part of the way that just their preparation was not good enough. South Sudan is, I believe, a country that just recently started implementing, a focus on the basketball team. Thought I saw somewhere that Gorgie Jang, recently retired NBA player, has been placed in charge of the construction of these rosters. And it's not like Sudan is without any NBA talent whatsoever, but clearly not on the same level as Team USA whatsoever, and this could have potentially been the biggest upset in Team USA basketball history. Now, again, still exhibition, so as we talk through all of these ideas, I'm gonna, it's important to keep in mind that there isn't quite that level of desperation for any of these programs to some degree, but especially for the US, where they are the ones with the target on their back, that they're just trying to figure themselves out, and all of these other teams are kind of gunning for them to some degree, because if you beat the US, you can beat anybody, is I feel like kind of the way that everybody else is looking at it. And the US is ultimately able to pull this one out 101-100. It did come to the final seconds where I believe it was JT Thor for South Sudan was able to hit a corner three with about 20 seconds left to put South Sudan up by 1. And it was LeBron coming down on the other side of the court and just continuing to show that, if he is committed, the physical force that he is, he's probably still has a number of years in the NBA if he would choose to do so. The fact that it is a conversation that he's still in that top 10, 15 players in the NBA. Now, some people might say that's disrespectful, and to that I would say, just ask Joel Embiid, because he made some very interesting comments on LeBron James, and the legacy, where Embiid, I'm paraphrasing here, so I don't want to act it like it's any direct quotes, but he was essentially saying that, you look at the names on the roster and you talk about how talented they are, but he almost directly referenced the fact that, LeBron is an older, that these players, including a LeBron, a Kevin Durant, they are much older versions of themselves, and they're not quite at the peak of their all-time powers, which was just a weird thing to say for him. But LeBron was incredible in this game. 23 points, 6 rebounds, and 7 assists on 10 of 14 from the field. So, LeBron. Also, something noteworthy is the fact that him and Curry were the two players that got the most amount of playing time in this game, both playing 23 minutes, and that's something to just sort of take into consideration to some degree as well, because of the fact that, we're talking about these older players and how much runway are they going to get during these Olympics. LeBron has already said that this is his last time that he's ever going to play in the Olympics. You feel like that might be a similar destiny for Steph Curry and Kevin Durant, and the fact that they are still sort of the alphas on this team, and they've been getting big playing time. But you want to talk about playing time, and I also just mentioned Joel Embiid. That is obviously one of the bigger subplots with this Team USA at this point. Embiid, and I think that it can be a little bit unwarranted to some degree, the amount of criticism that Embiid gets, but at the same time, you look at Embiid at this point, where we understand when he's fully healthy, he is one of the most dominant forces in the NBA on both sides of the floor, and injuries have definitely taken away from what is undoubtedly going to be a Hall of Fame career. And Embiid was asked about the idea of whether he is in the conversation for the greatest player of all time over the weekend, or if he would have been if it weren't for the injuries. And it's going to be one of the bigger what ifs in NBA history, at least recently. But Embiid, the fact of the matter is that he has not been very durable throughout the course of his career, and something that he doesn't really get slack for, I feel like, at least from Embiid defenders, which is fair, but he has struggled to come into seasons in good shape. I feel like that's been a pretty consistent storyline with him is, when it comes to that fourth quarter, and again, injuries do play into this to some degree as well, and those physical ailments that he's put up with, but when it comes to the fourth quarter, and again, I would take this year out of it because he wasn't able to play basketball for months, and finally he came in for the play-in, down the stretch of the season, the play-in tournament, playoffs, where he struggled in the fourth, but that's not even really what I'm referring to, because at that point he had already, he had just missed months of basketball. So I give him a little bit of a pass there, but it doesn't change the fact that throughout his career, I do think that this has kind of been the case with him, where he doesn't always have the, you talk about durability of being able to play in the first place. Joel Embiid playing in the fourth quarter is not the same version of himself that we see early on, and that's the case for every single NBA player, but I think it's a significant difference with Embiid. And, I talked about playing time just a minute or so ago. Anthony Davis was one of the top guys off of the bench in this game, as he consistently has been for the early exhibition games here for Team USA. Yet again, outplaying Embiid in terms of minutes. Now, the timing of doing the Anthony Davis versus Joel Embiid for being the starter may not be the greatest time to do so, because Anthony Davis did have probably his first, I would say, poor-ish offensive game, where he ended up in this one with, I believe it was 15 points, but it was on 4 of 12 from the field, so not his best offensive showing, but still active on the glass. He led the Team USA in rebounds throughout the course of the game. I believe he led all players in rebounds in this game. Outside of, actually, it was Carlick Jones, who I had remembered a little bit, I believe, at least from college when he played there. But Anthony Davis is somebody that is continuing to make it a conversation about who should be starting for Team USA. And Steve Kerr, he has shut it down entirely himself anyways. The fact that he said there are 3 players that are unquestionably going to be in the starting lineup for the US. It is Steph Curry, LeBron James, and Joel Embiid. So interesting for him to do so. The combination of the big men off of the bench between Anthony Davis and Bam Adebayo has been pretty successful up to this point, but not, it's an interesting conversation, and it feels like it shouldn't be, considering that Embiid, when he is healthy, he is in that top 5 conversation. People say he's a shoo-in. I think it's a little bit more debatable because of the health factor, but if you're talking about talent, it's really hard to come up with 5 players better than Embiid. But all this to be said, that is still an ongoing conversation here as to who should be the final starter. But the last thing I want to highlight here from this game is the fact that we saw Derek White finally getting some real minutes. He had been kind of on that bench mob for the U.S. for the first couple games, and he was also a late addition to the team, to be fair, but Steve Kerr decided to roll with Derek White, specifically in the second half of this game. He started the second half, he ended up closing the game, and his stat line does not jump out necessarily by any means. He only took 1 shot, but the thing is with Derek White is he is just one of those unselfish players that you need the glue guy, and the U.S. so far has been leaning on Drew Holiday, and he's shown that he is a glue guy in the way that specifically he plays into the defense and everything. But Derek White is another one of those guys that could end up kind of taking away some of the minutes from Tyrese Halliburton, who only played 7 minutes in this game. Nelson of the Basketball Podcast was texting me about whether or not he thought that Halliburton was hurt. I think it's more so that Steve Kerr right now just trusts Derek White a little bit more. And, obviously if you're talking about a star to run your team, that's where the answer is definitely Halliburton, but Derek White is going to be an interesting piece to this whole puzzle because he plays in those 11 minutes all in the second half. He has 5 assists in that playing time, the most of any player in the game in the second half, 4 assists. And, he's shown that he's a player that can hit big shots. He's not necessarily the personal creator, but if you give him opportunities in crunch time, he's going to convert. So that's a little bit of a developing storyline as well when you're talking about the hierarchy of this team. And granted, that's all going to be thrown off as soon as Kevin Durant returns. We're still waiting on him to come back. Have to imagine that he's going to be a starter. The starting lineup has been changing throughout here. Drew Holiday and Devin Booker ended up starting this game. I believe that's the same starting lineup as game 1 was, but Steve Kerr has played around with Jason Tatum in the starting lineup for a couple games, Anthony Edwards once, so that's going to be another interesting sort of wrinkle into this whole conversation is what does the minutes distribution look like when Kevin Durant does return. But definitely let us know what your thoughts on the comments were, or what your takeaways were on this game. But we're going to be sticking with some basketball here. Over the weekend, the Boston Celtics signed another player from their team last season to a contract extension. This time, Sam Hauser, who is a bench option for them. Very nice player, but it seemed like he was sort of a no-brainer that he was going to play out the last season with Boston and then walk in free agency, go get himself a deal. But instead, he signs one with the Celtics, which just adds on to all of the other contracts that the Celtics have thrown out this offseason. So we're going to be diving into that and what it looks like financially for the Celtics moving forward, as they are going to be the most expensive team in NBA history significantly. And whether or not they're going to be able to maintain that, or how much of it really they're going to be able to maintain over the course of the next couple years, because they can't keep everybody. They cannot financially afford that. So we're going to dive into all of that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and we are now going to be talking about the Boston Celtics and their spending surge over the course of this summer, because it has been an unprecedented amount of money that the Celtics have been dishing out over the course of this offseason, where you look at a championship team, usually you see those types of players that are on the roster go out and get massive contracts from opposing teams, because when you perform well in the playoffs, you end up typically getting a little bit more of a pay raise, and other teams are trying to steal you away. But the Celtics just flat out said that is not happening to us this offseason. We are going to re-sign everybody, and that is exactly what they've done, where you look at the top players that got minutes for them last season, and just about every single one of them are going to be back for next season. The only player that, was at least somewhat in the rotation last season that isn't going to be returning is O'Shea Brissett, who it just doesn't seem like they're going to be able to bring him back. I don't know if he's actually officially signed anywhere else yet, but that is sort of the idea. But you look at the list of players that they have been able to return, and they have their top 11 guys in minutes per games last season. And a lot of these players that they're not just bringing back for next year, but they have re-upped for the long term, where they gave Jason Tatum a long-term deal, Derek White a long-term deal. Last year, during the season, we saw them take care of Drew Holiday with a new extension. And then to even go as far as some of the bench guys this offseason, this weekend it was Sam Hauser, a 4-year, I believe it was $45 million, but him, Xavier Tillman they brought back, Luke Cornett they brought back, and it is just, unheard of how much money this group is going and spending. And the reality is, we understand that this is not going to be something that they can have this core for years on end to come, where they are going to have to make decisions, and some tough ones at that, as to how they want to advance here going forward, where Jason Tatum is the undisputed franchise centerpiece. I did just have a conversation with some Celtics friends of mine talking about, well, is there a possibility that everybody is just shooing in Jason Tatum as that franchise cornerstone? Could there be any possibility that Jaylen Brown, who just won the Finals MVP, the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, could he end up being the franchise building block? And ultimately to that, I feel like the answer is no, that I have a hard time imagining, unless Jason Tatum directly asks out himself, that he is going to remain in Boston as long as possible, and Jaylen Brown would probably be the player more likely to leave. And it's for a number of reasons, one of which being we've seen the drama that's taken place this offseason about how Jaylen Brown was excluded from Team USA, and it's just been a very awkward thing in general here, the fact that Jason Tatum's getting asked about it, whether or not Jaylen should have been left off, but who did Jaylen get left off for that last spot? It was Tatum and Brown's other teammate in Derek White. So the intertwining relationships here are just so uncomfortable, and it makes for a very difficult position. And Jaylen Brown, to some degree, you would think that after winning the Finals MVP, he would be sort of secure in himself in terms of what type of a player he is, but I can also fully understand from his perspective that he just won the Finals MVP and he wasn't selected as one of the top players for Team USA. Which, by the way, Jaylen Brown absolutely, if you're talking about pure talent, he deserved to be on that roster. But the idea that we just sort of talked about in the last segment with Derek White coming off of the bench. Derek White is not a better player than Jaylen Brown, but Derek White fits into the role that Team USA needs a little bit more. And Jaylen can do everything that Derek White can do, but almost the fact that he is a bigger figure in the NBA, that he just won Finals MVP, if he's sitting on the bench for the majority of these games, it's awkward, and it's a conversation, it's a thing. And as we've seen from Team USA early on, already there is so much scrutiny over the rotations and what the starting lineups look like and everything there. So you can also make the argument, well, Steve Kerr just has to figure out a way to make it work with Jaylen Brown. He's trying to make it work with everybody right now, and some players that are on that same tier as Jaylen Brown, the minute situation is just kind of awkward right now. So Derek White is somebody Team USA brings in, and there almost is no controversy with him whatsoever, because if he plays 0 minutes, nobody really bats an eye. And if he does what he does over the weekend and he ends up being a significant piece of being a supplementary role, it just kind of makes a lot of sense, because that's what he did at the highest level for the Celtics as they won the finals this past year. So, all of that to be said, I do feel like there's a possibility that there could be some level of friction that builds up about Jaylen Brown not feeling like he gets the respect that he deserves, because he is, I would say for the most part, it's been more of a conversation after this past year, but Jason Tatum's a better player than him, which makes him the second best player on his team, which takes away opportunities for him, marketing wise and all of that different stuff. Jason Tatum's getting his "Don't Stop Disbelieving," I think is the slogan that he has with the Jordan brand, that he has all these billboards going up across the nation. And Jaylen Brown probably feels like he is just as good, if not a better player than Tatum, and he just doesn't really get that same sort of mainstream popularity and respect. And that's something that does worry me a little bit for the Celtics as well, on top of all of the financial situations and the fact that they are going to have to at some point cut costs to, especially as they go through this change in the ownership group with Wick Grossbeck selling his share of the team, and that whoever comes in next is probably going to tell Brad Stevens, you have to cut some of this spending. And it's just two different angles how we could end up to a point where Jaylen Brown gets moved. But I definitely wouldn't shoe that in. I feel like the Celtics are probably going to keep the Jays together as long as they possibly can. And then outside of that, I mean, just about everybody is expendable. I actually feel like with the way that the relationship with the organization and everything that we were just sort of talking about, Derek White would probably be the candidate to be the third player out of this core that is most likely to stick around long term. I would say that there's a chance he even has a higher chance of sticking around long term than Jaylen Brown because of all those factors that I just laid out, and Derek is at a significantly cheaper price. So it's a very interesting conversation. Like, they give Drew Holiday the contract most of the way through last season. They give Porzingis a long-term deal to bring him in. Like, even though they're giving out all of this money, you have to imagine that they're going to try and find some sort of way to make room for some of their younger players that are developmental pieces and move off from some of their bench guys that they just signed. Like, I look at the deal that Sam Hauser just got. It seemed like the Celtics have two players in the ranks that could someday take over that sort of Sam Hauser role. You look at Baylor Shireman, who they just drafted in the first round this year, a very capable shooter. He's a capable passer. He could have potentially gotten some of those minutes as long as he's good enough defensively. Jordan Walsh is somebody they took in the second round last year. He was a top 5 player in his high school class. I think he can be an elite defender. Some rough spots for him during Summer League this past year, but someone where you feel like if he were ever able to have an offensive shot, a game behind him, that he could end up getting minutes. And instead the Celtics sort of block him a little bit, block either of these players with the Sam Hauser extension. I kind of just have to feel like Hauser and Tillman and Cornette and these guys that they bring back, that they are going to be willing to move off from them, and maybe they're just trying to capitalize on the opportunity of getting something for these players. But at the same time as well, you are so handicapped by that luxury tax apron that it's going to still make trading these players extremely difficult. So I would love to speak to somebody from inside that Celtics organization and try and figure out what they are doing, because it's going to be cool having your top 11 minutes guys back for the following season, but at the same time, eventually that's not sustainable in this new NBA with the luxury tax threshold. So, let me know what your expectations are moving forward here with the Celtics team, with who is going to be with them long term. But we got to take our final break of the show here, and when we come back on the other side, we will dive into the Boston Red Sox series loss against the Los Angeles Dodgers. They ended up getting swept, and it just sort of flattened some of the excitement that was building up to this point with going into the All-Star break. Just a couple games out behind the Yankees, and even just a few games back of the Orioles, and a playoff spot, and things changed pretty quick over the weekend. So I want to talk about whether or not it is time to panic if you are a Red Sox fan. So we're going to dive into all of that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be breaking down the series between the Boston Red Sox and Los Angeles Dodgers. And the Sox were headed into the All-Star break really feeling good about themselves. 11 games over 500 in play for the division. Granted, a little bit of a long shot in terms of our actual expectations. The numbers may say one thing, but we know that the Orioles are, I would say, significantly better than the Red Sox are. But most importantly for the Sox, they were holding a playoff spot in the wild card. The final wild card spot was theirs, and instead they come out this past weekend and they end up losing all 3 games to a Los Angeles Dodgers team where, of course, it's the Dodgers, and they are never going to be a bad opponent, even if they have some injuries. But on that note, dealing with a lot of injuries, especially with their pitchers, Mookie Betts, you throw that into the equation as well, and this felt like a series where the Sox very easily could have won it. And now it's not an overreaction because you lose to the Dodgers. Again, still a very good team sitting at, came into the series, I believe it was 15 games over 500 and, convincingly in the lead of their division, but felt like a place where they could have stolen some, and instead they ended up losing, and in large part it was because of a lot of self-inflicted wounds. They led in all 3 of these games. I think that they should have won games 1 and 2, and you can make an argument for all 3 games that they should have won, and now you can say that about the majority of sports games, but for the Sox to come away entirely shorthanded is just very disappointing for them, and they left way too many base runners on throughout the series. The tone was in game 1 where they had 9 hits, but they only scored 1 run. They were 5 of 39 with runners in scoring position throughout this entire series, and that, especially when you look at game 1, was an absolute killer for you, that you allowed the Dodgers to either get away with opportunities or you gave them opportunities because of the fact that, especially, game 1, the Red Sox, I would say, should have significantly been outplaying the Dodgers, but instead that's a game in the 9th inning, and you end up seeing how that game ends up working out. Kenley blows his second save of the series. He really, really struggled in this one overall. He came into the 9th inning in game 2, and he ended up giving up a home run to Kike Hernandez that ended up continuing the game on now, in extra innings, we saw some of the other issues with him, which the reality is that, their bullpen is just very gassed at this point. And that's why, Greg Weissart is pitching at the end of that game, who has been really, really bad for them over the past couple months. And, you have just some players that aren't as available as you would like. Zach Kelly has been somebody that has been somewhat reliable, but when he's playing, but he's fresh off of coming back from injury. You have Chris Martin and Justin Slayton, all of these bullpen arms that aren't available for you right now. And that's where the offense needs to capitalize on opportunities when they are given to them. And the offense, really outside of, I would say, Jarren Duran, who was pretty incredible in this series, hitting 500, 1.250 slugging percentage, 1.821 OPS. Outside of him, you were getting very little contributions from the offense as a whole, but that's not even maybe fully fair to say, because you look at Game 3 as well, where the Red Sox were able to get after James Paxton early on in that game. Paxton, a former Red Sox, so, a little bit of something there, but Duran ends up hitting the 2-run home run in the first inning that you got to feel good about, and then ultimately it was a tie game by the end of the first, and the Sox, who have just really struggled against left-handed pitching, something we've been talking about a good amount here on the show. They're now 12-17 against left-handed starters this season, and they could have had Paxton on the ropes, but instead they let Paxton get out of that inning without even trailing, and then he ends up striking out 7 batters and going 6 innings. And Paxton is by no means a strikeout pitcher. So you kind of let the Dodgers get away with one there, where they are dealing with so many injuries to their starting rotation, and some of their arms as well are very taxed. And instead you let a guy in Paxton just kind of humiliate a number of batters. Abreu had some really tough at-bats in this game, and again, it's just the struggles against left-handers continues to be a very consistent theme with them, and something that if they want to be taken seriously this season, they have to find a way, probably through the trade deadline, of acquiring at least one hitter who you can rely on more against left-handed pitching, because as we've been talking about it, Jarren Duran has actually done a pretty good job up to this point of being able to go against lefties. They really babied him for his first couple seasons when he was emerging as an everyday guy, that they didn't want him seeing left-handers. And now that's, I don't know if I'd call it a strength, but it's not a weakness of his game. And he's just kind of on an island by himself. Now, it doesn't help that you get some bad series from guys like Abreu and more importantly, Rafael Devers. But the offense definitely felt like they let way too many opportunities get out of their hands. Like I said, some of their pitchers that have been, their best arms did not perform well this series. Kenley had the 2 appearances, the blown save in Game 2, and then he came in again on Sunday night in Game 3, pitched the 8th inning, and he allowed 3 earned runs on three hits. So he was just a really inopportune time for him to not be the best version of himself. And then also in Game 3, you saw Cutter Crawford really struggle, where he had gone, I believe it was all of June, with 1 run allowed, 1 earned run, and he just got hit so hard in this game. He allowed, I want to say, let me double check the stats here, but he allowed, I believe it was 5 home runs. Yeah, it was. It was to Freeman, Hernandez, Lux, and Barnes, and Ohtani. I mean, did he pitch all of those? Did he allow 6 possibly? So poor management on my part in terms of having those numbers together, but it was ridiculous. 5 innings pitched, 7 hits, 6 earned runs, and at the end of the day, you can't overreact to this one performance from Crawford. He had been going on something like 20 scoreless innings or something along those lines. He had been incredible for them, and he finally came back down to earth a little bit. We've seen him have his ups and downs throughout the course of this season. He is already at a career-high innings pitched, so he's going to have games where he looks gassed. And, that long ball, when he was struggling earlier in the year, that's kind of what was happening to him, was the fact that he was getting taken deep, and that was definitely the case in this game. So to have some flat series from some of your best arms definitely hurts you. Now, overall, what does this series mean? I mean, not all too much. Feels like this was a Dodgers team that was pretty vulnerable, but it is still the Dodgers, which is a great organization. So you have to feel like, you can't kill yourself over it, but at the same time, I mean, it was disappointing to see them go down the way that they did. Now, the Sox, as we approach the trade deadline, are in that weird spot where they feel like they're in the realm of being buyers, but at the same time, now just outside of the wild card spot. It's a seller's market with the way that there are so many teams that feel like they are in play for a playoff spot, and with the current MLB format for the playoffs, that you ultimately have, more opportunities as the final team to work your way into a deep postseason run. So we'll see what they end up doing. Their next series here is coming against the Colorado Rockies, a series that should definitely be winnable for them, and see if they can, start to creep a little bit closer to that playoff spot, and about whether or not it's going to be something for the front office to actually invest in. Sounds like they have been talking about how the front office, sounds like they have been talking about how this is a team that has forced them to believe, but words can only go so far, especially with this Red Sox front office, that we're going to need to see maybe a little bit of proof in order to fully believe what they say. But let me know what your thoughts on this series were in the comments section. That is all the time we have for today, though. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.